Developments in the Middle East do seem set to feature heavily in a NATO summit, which starts in the Netherlands on Tuesday. Leaders are set to approve a major shift in policy, backing a new defense spending target of 5% of GDP. Now, the move, driven by pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump, reflects deepening fears over Russia, fueled by its war in Ukraine. DW's Teri Schultz reports.
The Hague has spent many months getting ready for this moment. So has NATO. Everything from the meeting's length, a couple of hours, to its agenda, mostly money, to its final document, a few paragraphs, has been tailored to ensure Donald Trump sees NATO solidarity as a good investment.
Well, I've said that to them. I said, if you're not going to pay, we're not going to defend. I said that 7 years ago.
Secretary General Mark Rutte has made it his mission to deliver on Trump's demand that each government spend at least 5% of its GDP on defense. Rutte says he's done it.
The Defense Investment Plan that allies will agree in The Hague introduces a new baseline, 5% of GDP to be invested in defense. This is a quantum leap that is ambitious, historic, and fundamental to securing our future.
This claim, despite the fact that the Spanish government openly refused to agree to 5%, so Rutte allowed Madrid to come up with its own spending plan as long as it meets obligations for its NATO contributions. Former Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis worries that securing spending promises under pressure may mean creative accounting, not greater security.
If nothing is being done, then we're not safer. And actually, we're in more danger because we're just pretending that we are doing something about it.
It remains to be seen how this Spanish arrangement will fly with Team Trump, which also failed in its reported attempt to keep any mention of Ukraine out of the final document, which fits on a single page and has one mention of Russia as a threat. That's a long way from last year's 12-page communiqué detailing alliance ambitions, which included countering Russian disinformation, combating climate change, and improving the status of women.
But it's not just for the sake of summit unity that these issues seem to have been pushed down NATO's list of priorities. Sources say for many months, employees who work on issues such as fighting Russian propaganda or reducing military emissions have been told to keep it quiet.
EU lawmaker Hannah Neumann, who works on women's issues and security, says this is a short-sighted approach.
It's quite clear that we need to do something on climate because it's going to be one of the biggest security threats in the years to come, that we need to fight disinformation, which is how exactly Russia is attacking all of us in NATO, and that it doesn't work if only half of the population does so.
But the German Marshall Fund's Christine Brezina says the alliance's priority now has to be sending the right message to one place, Moscow.
But if this declaration shows that the U.S. does have Europe's back, that the Europeans and Americans are getting along, that they're saying NATO is strong, what more can we want?
The final test of whether the summit choreography succeeded will come Wednesday when leaders are due to approve the declaration.
Ian Bremmer is a political scientist and founder and president of the Eurasia Group. He joins us today from New York City. So I know we've asked you on to talk about NATO, but first I have to ask you as well, how do you read Iran's response to American strikes on its nuclear facilities so far from what we've seen?
So far, and frankly, I think what we've seen is what it's going to be. The Iranians publicly telegraphing in advance to the Americans about what strikes are going to be, where they're going to be, when they're going to be, which helped ensure that there were not any casualties for the United States, and also publicly saying that the number of missiles they used the same as the American missile strikes against the 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. This is obviously asymmetrical, the Iranians doing everything they can to minimize damage to the Americans while telling their own people domestically that they're destroying the Americans and that the U.S. did nothing to them. This is Iran in an incredibly weak position, not wanting to get into a broader fight with the United States, even though the Americans just did what they could to blow up the crown jewels of their nuclear program that they've been unwilling to negotiate away for years and years and years. So, I mean, the geopolitics are very stark here. And frankly, this is the biggest, at least as of today, the biggest win that President Trump has had of his second administration, at least on the foreign policy stage.
So if this is more of a face-saving response and exercise from the Iranians, where does that leave things at this point in terms of, well, diplomatically? It's really loud out there, but do you see a diplomatic off-ramp going forward?
Well, it would be wonderful if that were the case. I mean, oil prices are down. No one's blowing up the Straits of Hormuz. No one's attacking Gulf energy capabilities. So, I mean, the potential panic around a crisis has receded. But that doesn't mean that we're going to have effective negotiations. Let's keep in mind that as of right now, Israel and Iran are still involved in a war. Iran has had a large number of their military leaders assassinated by Israel. And their supreme leader is in hiding deep underground in a bunker. And they're not using the internet because they're concerned about surveillance and espionage. They're not able to meet together. They're not able to effectively communicate. And to have an effective negotiation with the United States, you need more than just the Iranian government saying, okay, let's climb down. You need the capacity to effectively formulate and implement that policy. And what I'm suggesting to you is that that has been degraded significantly over the last week. So Iran may well be much more willing to capitulate to the Americans at this point. It certainly seems that way, though they'd still need to find a way to effectively present it to their public. But their ability to implement there, as long as the Israelis continue to attack them, is going to be more challenging.
So NATO leaders are meeting at their summit in The Hague this week. What do you think they will make of all this? The White House earlier, before this Iranian response, said that Donald Trump would be attending, maybe not anymore, after Iran's response. But either way, what do you think we'll see from the U.S.'s allies?
Oh, I think he's going to attend. You know, the G7, he left early, said it was about the Middle East crisis. It wasn't. He just hates the G7. He didn't even have a meeting in the Situation Room that night. It was not until the next afternoon. That was misreported in the United States. He just didn't feel like having those conversations. NATO, he's coming with a big win, an announcement that NATO countries, with the exception of Spain, which apparently got an exception because they're Spanish, are going to have 5%, a target of 5% defense spending, which is because Trump pushed them in that direction. That didn't happen under Biden. So he takes that as a win. And now on the back of that, he's had this military success in Iran, and the Iranians have been unable and incapable of responding. So I think that Trump shows up in the Netherlands as showing success. And wants to announce it, wants to make the NATO summit into a victory lap for him. I'm sure he'll be insufferable around it, and I'm sure a lot of his bilateral meetings won't be easy, and you still have all the trade challenges in the background. But as far as NATO, Trump can say that NATO is stronger now than it's ever been. It's expanded, and it's more capable, and only will continue to be more capable every day. And that he deserves some credit for that. That will be what you see from President Trump at that table.
But do you think this, expected pledge for 5% spending of GDP on defense will come just as a result of President Donald Trump and, their allies need to placate him? Or is it because other NATO members have now actually recognized that they do need to act?
They should have recognized they needed to act when Biden was president, at least after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. They should have recognized that after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. They should have recognized that after Russia invaded Georgia in 2008. So, I mean, definitely the geopolitical environment is playing a significant role. And the fact that the Europeans have not invested in their own defense, either singularly or collectively, for 35 years, I do think that that is now becoming more urgent and more obvious, and the Russians are they're a big component of that. But Trump is part of the reason, and I wish that came with a greater commitment to a strong European Union as in America's advantage. Trump does not agree with me on that. He thinks he wants to see a weak and divided Europe as far as the EU goes, but he wants to see a strong and collective NATO. And there, I think he has had success.
Yeah. With Trump on what you describe as a victory lap at this NATO meeting, do you see European support for Ukraine now consolidating around whatever it is Trump does or says at the summit?
You know, Trump didn't meet with Zelensky when he was planning on it, when he left the G7. He doesn't like Zelensky, doesn't trust Zelensky, but he feels like he has a better relationship with Ukraine, having beaten up Zelensky at the Oval Office when he said famously, "You don't have the cards," and then he suspended Ukrainian intelligence sharing from the Americans and their defense support, suspended it. And the Ukrainians that I spoke to in leadership said that really forced them to rethink their relationship with the Americans. That's why they accepted the critical minerals deal and pushed it through Parliament. It's why they accepted a 30-day ceasefire with no preconditions. They understood they needed the Americans on their side. Now, since that has happened, Trump has failed to get any deal whatsoever with Putin. He's tried. He had several phone calls with the Russian president, offered to remove sanctions, offered to work together on the Arctic, other issues as well, if only Putin was prepared to accept a ceasefire. And Putin said absolutely not. And Trump is blaming, of course, his advisors because he could never be responsible for anything. And he's blaming Putin, saying he's different, he's gone crazy since COVID. But, whoever is at fault, the reality is Trump has not been able to get a deal done with Putin, and therefore is working more closely with the Europeans and the Ukrainians. We're in a very different position today and entering this NATO summit than we were when Trump was meeting with Zelensky in the Oval Office, than we were when J.D. Vance, vice president, was addressing the Munich Security Conference back in February.
Yeah, it feels like it's a very different world each and every day here. And of course, a lot of what is going on in the world overlays, right? You've got Russia and China probing NATO's periphery, and then now Iran challenging Western influence. Do you think there's something we should be looking out for at this summit that could suggest, Western unity of purpose is actually solid, or do you see it waning given these dynamics?
We can't dispense with the challenges of the G7. There's no communique. The U.S. is essentially fighting a trade war with its allies, just as it is with its adversaries. And the U.S. and the EU are not close in resolving that. But the NATO relationship, as I've suggested, is stronger. And European capabilities are greater. Now, the fact that the Europeans are taking this seriously now, as opposed to 35 years ago, the fact that the Europeans are now trying to build their competitiveness and entrepreneurship and cut back on red tape and move forward on the Draghi plan, we all agree it's the right thing to do. But you can't just snap your fingers and magic away 35 years of underperformance. The Europeans are militarily weak and will be for the foreseeable future. The Europeans are underproductive and don't have the world's leading technology companies, and that will remain the case for the foreseeable future. So I do worry that the Europeans are in trouble in the medium to long term because they won't be able to consistently execute on these plans. But certainly for now, this NATO summit is both important and constructive, and I think everyone attending will take it that way.
Ian Bremmer, thank you so much. As always, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Always good to see you guys.
And we can get more perspective on that with Fabrice Pothier. He's the CEO of Rasmussen Global and specializes in foreign policy. So the big topic at this upcoming NATO summit, as we've just heard, was supposed to be the boost in defense spending. Do you think the U.S. strike on Iran and now Iran's response is going to overshadow that that priority for the coming days?
Not really. I think what will and might overshadow is more Pedro Sanchez breaking unity on defense spending pledge for mostly domestic political reasons. I think this is posing a real challenge to what Mark Rutte is trying to assemble, which was a pretty strong package on defense spending commitments and NATO unity. And unfortunately, Sanchez has chosen to play domestic politics versus his responsibility as a member of the alliance.
Yeah, you're referring, of course, to the fact that most of the European countries have pledged they'll raise defense spending to the target of 5% of GDP, but Spain not on board. It said it won't raise its contribution to that level. What does that actually mean in practical terms for the alliance?
Well, first we have to wait to see if there might be a deal at the last minute for Spain to somehow come back in the fold and agree at least not to go against the consensus on 5%. So we have to be cautious here. But if Sanchez were to be really digging down or doubling down on his opposition, that will create a real headache because essentially NATO works as a collective consensus-driven organization. So you can't really do exemption. This is not like the European Union. And the moment you have one ally saying, well, that new pledge is not applying to us, you are surely going to have other allies. And I've read today, that Belgium is already making some noise in that direction. You are going to have other allies saying the same thing, that they can't meet the 5% goal and therefore they also need an exemption. And then if you end up with so many exemptions, then you don't have a powerful collective decision on lifting defense spending across Europe. So it's a real issue. And I think Donald Trump would be entitled to be angry and to choose to be disruptive and say, well, Europe is not serious about not just doing things for me, but doing things for itself.
Yeah, absolutely. If you give one exemption, why not have to give out more in the future? I can see how that makes the whole thing fall apart. What is Spain's concern with this new spending goal?
Well, I think there are two levels here. What the Spanish officials will tell you is that they don't think they can reasonably or sustainably meet a 3.5% goal. That 2.1 or 2.2 is good enough to rebuild enough of the Spanish military and armed forces. What they occurred, however, is that Spain has been the biggest laggard in defense spending for the past 10 years plus. They are still, as of today, at 1.3%, and I'm being generous. And therefore, they still have a lot of catch-up to do with the previous target that was set 10 years ago. The other layer to the whole reason why Pedro Sanchez is breaking consensus is profoundly domestic political reason, which is he's been in trouble for the past few weeks on some count of some corruption scandals in his own party. And he's trying to show that he's, diverting attention away from the domestic political controversy to the international one, and also trying to give, I would say, some red meat to his left-wing allies in his own coalition to show that he's not engaging in this kind of Trump warmongering defense spending commitment. So I think he's playing a very cynical game, which has its own logic for his own survival in Spain. But I think it is appeasing, in order to appease his own political base, he's ending up appeasing Vladimir Putin.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on DW with your insights. We'll be speaking to foreign policy analyst Fabrice Pothier.